So as Rabbi Keller mentioned at the beginning of our service, because of my comments about rain, it is Parashat Noach. We are in the story of the flood, which both last Sunday, you can hear my voice is a little bit raspy, because last Sunday morning and this morning at preschool Shabbat, Rabbi Keller and I sang our annual rendition of Rise and Shine, and not exactly a Jewish song, but nonetheless, it's got hand motions, it's got clapping, it's got great group participation, and Rabbi Keller was jumping up and down on the bima, and I threw out my vocal cords at the same time. So he is in better shape than I am across the board in all ways. I want to ask you though, speaking of kids, what are, if you remember, if you can recall, give me some annoying parentisms. Annoying parentisms. The things that are annoying until we become parents ourselves and then end up saying those very same words to our kids. Give me an annoying parentism. Huh? Because I said so. Why? Because I said so. Very good. What's another one? Sam, who is that? Who said clean your room? Clean your room. Sam, was that you? Clean your room. Very good. That's an annoying parentism. Yes, ma'am. You're the only one here that raised your hand.
She learned it from Kayla.
Right. So go ahead.
If other kids are doing it, doesn't mean you can.
If other kids are doing it, doesn't mean you can do it. Same one as if everyone's jumping off of the Golden Gate Bridge, Brooklyn Bridge, Manhattan Bridge, any bridge. Right? Right? Okay. Chesapeake Bay Bridge. Right.
Do as I say, not as I do.
Do as I say and not as I do. Very good. Yes. You were going to say the same one. Do as I say, not as I do. Susie Roth. If I had four wheels, would I be a wagon? Mr. Roth.
This hurts me as much as it
hurts me as much as this hurts me as much as it hurts you was back in the day when we actually got a little potch from time to time. My parents loved a little potch from time to time, and my good friend John told me when I was about 12, if you want to get your mom to stop smacking you around next time she does it, laugh at her, and she won't do it anymore. And it worked. This is going to hurt me more than I hurt you. With the belt, right? Remember that? Yep. I don't think that is going to hurt me. Yeah. Anyway, Sam, you have two tonight. There are people in a name fill in the blank who are starving. Finish your dinner. How about two more? Sir, go to your room. Gail Bear. What would the congregants say? That's right. Spoken like the president of the congregation. That's right. That's right. Very, very good. Now, I bet that if we wanted to, we could take that entire list of annoying parentisms and trace them back to the Torah, and not only trace them back to the Torah, but trace them back to the Torah in places where God was the one who said them. And the reason why I say that is because in the order of the world, remember last week, the world was chaos, tohu vavohu, and it became ordered. And then God created the world and spoke, and everything was in order. God spoke, and Rabbi Keller spoke about how God's word is what created the word is what started the creation of the world. Well, we could probably trace all of this back to the creation of the world and to the Torah itself. What happens in this week's Parsha is the world is, as the Torah tells us, Hamas, violent. It went back to tohu vavohu. It went back to crazy. Except this time, it wasn't the cosmos that were in disorder, and it wasn't, that which existed at the beginning of time when God created the world. It was humanity. And it wasn't disordered or chaos. The word was, it was violent. It was nasty, evil, violent. Hamas is the same word as the terrorist organization Hamas. Terrible, evil, violent. So, in this week's Parsha, something very interesting happens. A parentism is founded. And the parentism goes something like this. I shouldn't have had to ask you to do that. I shouldn't have had to ask you to do that. You should have known better, / you should have known to do it yourself. Now, no one here said that parentism, but I am certain that everyone in this room got that at some point in their life, either from a parent or a spouse. I should not have asked you to do that when the person says to the other person, I didn't know, or should I have done this, or should I go and do that? I shouldn't have to ask you. Everyone knows this annoying parentism? Now, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, the former chief rabbi of Great Britain, of the so-called Anglo community, the retired, wrote a wonderful, wonderful drash in this week, and everyone should really, of the things that you week in preparation for Shabbat or on Shabbat, should read Rabbi Jonathan Sacks's, it's called Covenant and Conversation, and they're archived, so if you don't like this year's, you can look back at that and last year's, and they're probably about 1,000 to 1,200 words of commentary on the week's Parsha. And he talks about this idea of, I shouldn't have had to have asked you, or I shouldn't have to ask you, you should know to do it yourself. And he talks about it in the following context. He points out in this week's drash that he wrote that there is a midrash. And this midrash was written by Martin Buber's grandfather. It was translated and commentaried by, it's called the Buber Midrash. It is from, I don't even want to get it. It was published in 1885, in the latter part of the 19th century. This is Martin Buber's grandfather, the great rabbi of the 20th century. And in this midrash, there's a verse in this week's parsha, in Parashat Noach. The ark hits the dirt, right? The waters begin to subside, and remember, the dove is dispatched from the ark, right? And what does the dove come back with? Just Trivial Pursuit? An olive branch to tell Noah and his family that it's time to come out. And it says that, by the way, at the beginning of the flood story, God instructs Noah to build the ark and to put all the animal by twosies, and so on and so forth. And then it says that God instructs Noah and his family, take your family and go into the ark because it's going to start raining. Now, at the end of this story, when it's time to disembark, I've been on a cruise, when it's time to disembark, this was not exactly a cruise ship, although with all the animals, it was similar. It says, God spoke, in the Torah, in Genesis, God spoke to Noah saying, come out of the ark together with your wife, your sons, and your sons' wives, and then bring out all the animals and do the reverse. And the question the rabbis asked was, why does God instruct Noah both in going in, embarking, and disembarking from the ark? And Rabbi Sacks uses this midrash from the Buber midrash and says the following. He says, the text is in two parts, and it is a commentary of God's words to Noah. Quote, then God said to Noah, come out of the ark. On this, the midrash says, Noah said to himself, since I only entered the ark with permission from God, should I leave the ark also with permission from God? He asks himself what he believes to be a rhetorical question. Since I entered the ark with God's permission, shouldn't I leave the ark with God's permission? But the Holy One of Blessing, according to this commentary, this midrash says, are you looking for permission? In that case, I give you permission. As it says, then God said to Noah, come out of the ark. So God is sitting there saying, like the parent, oh, you want me to give you permission to leave the ark? Fine, leave the ark. Now the annoying parentism comes in the second midrash. And this midrash said, Rabbi Yehuda bar Eli, if I had been there, I would have smashed down the doors of that ark and taken myself out of it. In other words, I wouldn't have waited, like the annoying parentism, I wouldn't have waited for God to give me permission. I'd been stuck on this ark for 40 days. It smells. There are animals doing their thing all over the place. My kids haven't bathed, right? This was not a cruise ship. This was an ark made of gopher wood. It wasn't that large, and there were a lot of animals on it. It did not smell. I would have smashed the doors, not only because it smelled and it was uncomfortable, and I'd been on it for 40 days, and I had cabin fever, but I would smash it down because it was time to go do what? To put the world back together. And I would have gone and done that, and I wouldn't have needed God's permission. And he says, Rabbi Sacks, that the moral of this midrashic play on the first one being Noah wasn't, as we know, the sharpest tool in the shed to begin with. Oh, if I got God's permission to go in, I need God's permission to come out. And the second midrash, which was, what was Noah waiting for? You shouldn't have had to have waited to leave. I mean, you shouldn't have had to have asked if I should leave. You should have just left. That he says the moral is indeed that when it comes to rebuilding the world that has been destroyed, or in his words, when it comes to rebuilding a shattered world, you do not wait for permission. God gives us permission. God expects us to go on ahead. Like our parents, God expects us to know enough, to have enough value and enough morality and enough will, right, of God, godly will, to go start doing the work and not having to ask permission. And this applies to everything that is good. Anytime that we're not just repairing the world as Noah was, or having to go out and start the reparation of the world, but anytime that we are doing something for the sake of goodness, or for the sake of justice, or for the sake of peace, or for the sake of civility, we don't have to wait for permission to do it. We should just do it. Now, I want to say one thing about what's happening in Israel right now. There are a lot of things that we could say. There's no magic wand, as we know. I don't have pixie dust, as you know. Jews don't do pixie dust, but we like Disney, but we don't do pixie dust. I heard a very, very interesting idea this week, based on everything that's happening in Israel. And the question goes something like this. What is Israel waiting for? What is Israel waiting for? Is Israel waiting for permission from the international community for peace? To create two states? Is Israel waiting for the United States to give it permission? Is Israel waiting for God to give it permission? Is Israel waiting for its enemies to tell it what to do? What's Israel waiting for? I heard a great talk from Rabbi Brad Hirschfield this week, in which he proposes the following. Maybe it's time for Israel to unilaterally decide that the Palestinians not only should have a state, but here's your state. Here are the borders. Here are the lines. And here are the conditions. Maybe it's time for Israel, instead of the Palestinians going to the UN to declare their own statehood, maybe it's time for Israel to say, you want your state? Here's your state. Here are the borders to your state. Here are the walls, the boundaries. Here are the rules that we're going to play by with you. Have your state. Build your own economy. Build your own security forces. Take care of your own utilities, your water, your garbage, your sewage. Take care of your own medical. Take care of your own hospitals. Treat your own people. Unilaterally decide, here you have it. Very similar, by the way, to what the UN did in 1948, which is unilaterally decide. Not all Israelis, of course, were happy with this. Begin wasn't happy with it. All of the disciples who believed that Israel, that the territory was going to be beyond the Jordan, that included part of Jordan, weren't happy with it. But the world unilaterally decided, there's your Jewish state. That maybe it's time for Israel and the world, for some other body, to say unilaterally, there's your state. That's what you want? There it is. Not discuss land swaps and not discuss, all of that's going to be, of course, part of it. The question that I ask watching this, look, this is a tape we've already heard, my friends. This is a tape that we already have heard, and we know what happens next. We know that it escalates. Watch 2 minutes of headline news on any channel. Read the New York Times front page and the LA Times front page. The storyline is, look at the Palestinians who got hurt this week. Look at the Palestinians who got killed this week. Look at the, right? There's nothing in there, in the headline or in the first paragraph, about the violence being perpetrated against Jews. The Jews are getting killed yet again. That's not in the headline. That's not in the soundbite. What's in the soundbite is the victim, the underdog. I think we are very much in a Noah-like situation here. What are we waiting for? Whose approval are we waiting for? Whose approval is going to miraculously appear out of thin air? No one's. The world doesn't want a Jewish state. The world seems to want a Palestinian state, but doesn't want to do anything about it. Actually, I would argue the only ones who want a Palestinian state are the Israelis. So maybe it's time to not wait for that magical voice, the booming voice from heaven, giving permission, giving validation. Maybe it's time for Israel just to unilaterally go ahead and do it. What's the world going to react? With dismay and disapproval? Israel does anything and the world reacts. The UN reacts with dismay and disapproval. Why would this be any different? Make a unilateral decision. Here's your Palestinian state. Oh, by the way, you can't use our hospitals anymore for your injured. You can't have a society that is economically supported by the state of the Jewish people. We're not going to be in charge of your sanitation. We're not going to be in charge of your sewage. We're not going to be in charge of your water. We're not going to get involved in how you power your houses or don't power. The one thing that we aren't going to accept is a military, as any kind of formal or informal militia. Have your state. Go at it. I would love to see what would happen. I just thought, again, thinking this out loud, it was a wonderful idea. It was an idea that, based on this midrash from this Torah portion, maybe it's time for Israel to stop waiting and to finally, once and for all, do something about the two-state solution, which is come up with it and implement it and not ask for permission. In our own lives, though, that was an oversimplification of what I learned this week, but it's something I would like us to think about through the Shabbat. In our own lives, though, I think the message also of this parsha has to do with levels of righteousness. Noach, as we know, was righteous in his generation, but compared to Abraham was not righteous. And the reason is because in order to be righteous, like Abraham, we have to go and do the things that are right in this world without waiting for permission from God, or waiting for approval, I should say, from God. We have to go do those things ourselves. Tear down the door of the ark and get off the ark ourselves to go rebuild our world. We can't wait, and we shouldn't wait for others to do it. And so in conclusion, I want to just finish up with one more part of what Rabbi Sachs' beautiful words this week. He says that in his conclusion, this is not this idea of just going out and doing it and not waiting for God's permission. It's not carte blanche to do whatever we like. Not all innovations, not all movements, not all ideas are necessarily constructive, and some can be very destructive indeed. But this principle of go and do it, don't wait for me to ask, that idea is what the Creator, what God wants us. God's greatest creation, humanity, is to be creative, to do what makes Judaism unique, which is this high value which is placed on the human person and the human condition. That we should not only have the will, but we are the answer to the world's problems. He says, faith is the courage to take a risk for the sake of God or the Jewish people, to begin a journey to a distant destination knowing that there will be hazards along the way, but knowing also that God is with us, that God is giving us strength if we align our will with God's. That faith is not certainty, but the courage to live with uncertainty. And so on this Shabbat, during very uncertain times, not only in Israel, but in our own lives, I would encourage you to think about this idea. Not just the idea that I shared about what to do with the situation in Israel, but even in our own community. Think about what it means to have courage, what it means to not wait, to have to be asked to do something. And then I think you will realize that the words of our parents were actually not annoying, but they were godlike. That in those times and in those places, almost all of them, not all of them, but almost all of them, what our parents were ultimately saying was, I can't do it for you. And I'm not going to do it for you. And I shouldn't have to ask. go out, do the right thing, do the just thing, do the compassionate thing, do the mitzvah without having to be asked. Shabbat shalom.